أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين شفيع المذنبين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من يوم عداوتهم إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله عز وجل في كتابه الحكيم وهو أصدق القائلين: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I begin in the name of Allah, the most kind, the most merciful. It's due to that kindness and mercy that we have these opportunities where we gather in remembrance and glorification of Him, Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. We then send our condolences to our 12th and living Imam, Al-Hijjah, Ajalallahu Ta'ala, Farajahu Sharif, as we gather on this evening to commemorate the Istishhad anniversary of the children of Nabi Hazrat Muslim, Muhammad and Ibrahim alayhim afdalus salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we can show as much bravery and loyalty to the Imam of our time as these two young boys showed to the Imam of theirs, inshaAllah. As we commemorate the life of these two young children, this would be the ideal time to continue the discussion we had begun on the wiladat of our 10th Imam alayhi salam. And if you recall in that event, alaykum salam, we discussed we discussed youth basically, right? The age group of youth, and we divided the discussion into two parts. The first part of the discussion was what are the responsibilities that we as adults have towards the youth. And we had broken it down into 5 things, and very quickly we said the first responsibility that we as adults have towards our youth is to, number 1, provide a solid and consistent religious upbringing at home. And so the home is where everything begins, and that is where the foundations are laid. It's also important, I don't want to focus on this part because there's a whole nother part. But the idea of we've been taught to break down our upbringing of the youth in the 777 category, where in the first 7 years we allow them to basically be the kings or the queens of the home, But in those moments, the establishment of our morality and our values and our religion and the principles of it have to be vibrant. So this child cannot be absent from the religiousness of the house during the first 7 years. And what that means is that they must see their parents pray. They must see their parents fast. They must see their parents wear the hijab. Because if those things are absent, then when it's time to instill these values in them, it'll be foreign to them, right? And so I don't expect a 5-year-old to pray salah with me. It'd be nice, but their attention span's not there. I don't expect that. But we have to have them at least see that practiced in the home. And then the next 7 years is when we establish principles, right? Establish truth, establish and have them practice the religious principles. And if we have to be strict on it, then we should be strict on it. And I think that's where there's a lot of confusion sometimes, because it's tough. Like, it has to be a gradual process. You can't just go 6 years, 11 months, 29 days, do what you want, and then 7th year, boom, you start with the discipline, and it doesn't work well, right? But the gradual flow has to be there. And then the last 7 years is where we begin to now use them for our benefit, right? In the sense they become partners for us rather than subjects of us. But these 777 are important that it's established in the home, right? And it's established the way it's meant to be. This is the principle. Now application, good luck. The application is the tough part, right? Because it's constantly fluid and moving. But that's the expectation. And then we said number 2, our responsibility as adults is to never stop giving guidance. To do it in a respectful manner, to learn how to do it, when to do it, extent of doing it, but giving the guidance, continue it, necessary, right? We give this, and of course if we live it, it has more impact. Number 3, we must empower our youth and allow them and listen to their ideas, and we talked about that. Number 4, that our behavior as adults, now this is outside of the home because we're all one community, that our behavior as adults have to be enticing, have to be attractive for our youth, and so they can't come to mosque and see behavior that repulses them, and so that's part of our responsibility as adults. And number 5, we said we don't ever shut the door on anyone, ever. It doesn't matter what they've done, doesn't matter the mistakes they've made, but we act as if we had amnesia, and we don't remember their past, and we accept them for who they are now, rather than reminding them of the mistakes that they have made. So these are the 5 principles we said we as adults have to have for our youth. Today I want to look at the other side, and that is to look at the responsibilities of the youth themselves. And it's important that we understand that there's a lot of responsibility for the youth. The youth are not, they're not excused in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala simply for being a youth. So sometimes we may chalk up a mistake to ignorance, and that's fine. I think Allah Azza wa Jal is more understanding than we are. But sometimes there are actions that are done by our youth that are based on ignorance, and then there are times when these actions are being done because of stubbornness or habit or rebellion. And Allah is the best one to distinguish what the cause of that action is, right? And so yes, out of ignorance, I can see Allah Azza wa Jal excusing that, because we would excuse that, But eventually, the conduct of the youth, if it is leaning towards or on this other side of stubbornness, of rebellion, it's important that our youth understand that you are responsible in the eyes of Allah Azza wa Jal, and so everything will be taken into account for. And I still am looking for a way to ensure, that the knowledge of accountability is enough to change a lifestyle. Alaikum salam. What do I mean by that? I think we as adults know that we are accountable in the eyes of God. Yet many a times our behavior does not show that. So it's as if we forgot, or we don't care that we're going to be held accountable. And so to have or expect the youth to understand that, and that's a tough task, you know what I mean? That's a real tough task. That is, I as a father don't get it sometimes. How do I expect my kid to get it? But if we can figure that out, and this is where, if you recall, I think it was about 2 years ago, we talked about yaqeen, certainty. And yaqeen, to reach that level of yaqeen, is that standard from which action becomes necessary, right? If I reached yaqeen, I would never take the warning that God is watching lightly. I would never do that. And so until we reach yaqeen, then to have consistent action may not always be present. You understand? But if we hit yaqeen, yaqeen guarantees action. And so again, so it's important for the youth here today and the youth who will listen to this in the future to understand that there is this expectation of responsibility that you have in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let's start with some basics. What is the period of youth? And we highlighted or just touched upon it last week, but I want to go into a little bit more detail on it today. In Islam, there are 3 parameters of ages, right? So the first, Allah says you would become mumayyiz. And the second one is you would become baligh, and the third one is when you hit rushd, right? Mumayyiz basically means you can tamyiz, you can distinguish between right and wrong. And I am asked this question all the time, and so I try to bring it up in different ways so you would hear it without me seeming like I keep answering that same question. Mumayyiz is basically around the age of 6 or 7. Yeah? When they can distinguish between right and wrong, they can distinguish between genders, they know certain things, they can tell this is a woman, they can tell this is a man. And when you hit that age, what we would want, especially here at this mosque, and inshallah all mosques, is that at this age now, boys don't go into the girls' side at the age of 6 or 7, right? Because they're mumayyiz, they can. And so if they would go there, the ladies would have to wear hijab in front of them, right? And similarly, if a girl needs to come to the men's side, she would wear a hijab. And if, let's say, your wife is not there, your daughter needs to come, this is the hijab and these things. At the age of 6 or 7, we would expect that level of behavior here. That's mumayyiz. And then there's the age of bulugh. Bulugh is different for the genders, right? So for boys, today bulugh is as early as 11 or 12. It's not 15. 15 is the last age of bulugh. There are signs that happen for boys much earlier. And so it's important for parents to know that too, that my son could become baligh at the age of 11, right? Or 12. And really there's no way to know, because the signs of that bulugh are very, at that age, embarrassing for boys to talk about. And so at the age of 12, I want parents to assume your boy is already baligh, right? And so you treat them as such. That means you wake them up for fajr, you make sure you talk about khums with them, you talk about taqleed with them, and these are things that we talk about at bulugh seminars that we have every year, that we discuss this. For girls, they become baligh at 9. It's very cut and dry, 9, right? And then there's a period between bulugh until you hit rushd. Yeah, rushd means mental maturity. And the way the Quran describes mental maturity is generally the age of 40. Yeah, that at 40 you are established in your way of life. Yeah, doesn't mean you can't change at that point, but change becomes much more difficult after that point, right? And so between the age of bulugh and mumayyiz is generally the age of youth. Yeah, so you're talking about a span of maybe from 12 to 40, 15 to 40, or 9 to 40 is that age of youth. And so it's a huge chunk of our lives, and it's a chunk of time that is very important in Islam, very important, right? And the reason for its importance, we'll talk about this. There's nothing more beautiful in Islam coming from God and His Prophet that when a youth worships God. Nothing more beautiful, you know? Like when you become older, like I'm on that teetering side, you know what I mean? Like I'm already old, but I'm just teetering further. Like when you worship, like I've said this, sometimes people don't like this, but it's a fact, man. Like listen, when you get older, your body changes. When your body changes, things change. So you sleep less, you wake up more frequently at night, whatever, all of these things happen. And so when somebody who goes through those type of changes worships God in the middle of the night, but their body woke them up already. You know what I mean? But when a youth who can sleep for 18 hours decides to wake up to pray to God, God loves it. He absolutely loves it, right? And we'll give a tradition on this in this regard. So number one, understand that age when you can choose, when you have so many options. When you're young, you have options, and when you decide to pick God from amongst all those options, nothing better than that. Nothing better than that, right? But at the same time, the age of youth is also really important because in Islam, there's this understanding that youth are more inclined towards accepting the truth than those who are already mentally mature and have already established themselves. So if a person reaches the age of 40 and they are either, I don't say a disbeliever, but a skeptic. Let's call them a skeptic, where they know this is true, but like, you really, really, you sometimes hear it in the way people talk, like When someone doesn't like matam, you will hear them say certain statements when they become older, that they just beat themselves. And you're like, you make this statement because you have reached that age of stubbornness now, right? But a youth who hasn't reached that age of that cementing of their mentality, cementing of their personality, they're more inclined towards the youth. There's a really nice hadith where once a man by the name of Abi Jaffer al-Ahwal, he went to Basra and he came back and he met the sixth Imam as-Sadiq alayhi afdalu salatu wassalam. Salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. And so he had gone to Basra for a mission, for a reason. And so the Imam says to him, Atayt al-Basra? He said, you came back from Basra? Did you go to Basra? And he says, Na'am. And the Imam says, كيف رأيت مسارعة الناس إلى هذا الأمر ودخولهم فيه? He says, how did you find the people in their hastening to this matter? Like when you preached to them, how did you find them? Were they inclined towards it? Did they enter into this affair easily? He says, the person replies back and says, Wallah innahum laqalil. He says, very few accepted this and very few even act on it, So in other words, like I was preaching, but I was just preaching to I was just a wall, I can understand him sometimes, that sometimes you preach. You wish that sometimes you could do more than preach, but you can't. Even when we talk to our youth sometimes, you wish you could just shake the idea into their head gently, but it doesn't. Sometimes you just have to say it. They have to eventually accept it for themselves. And so he said that very few accepted these matters. And the Imam says, Alayka bil ahdath. He says, you should go and speak to the youth of Basra. فَإِنَّهُمْ أَسْرَعُوا إِلَى كُلِّ خَيْرٍ. Because the youth hasten towards anything good. Yeah? And this is what I find to be a very absolutely true statement. That when you can present a good idea for the youth, they are ready to accept that good idea and act upon it. Like for example, today our youth are very much inclined towards different aspects of community service, right? So for example, you have like a homeless drive, or you have a food packing drive, and you'll see busloads of youth show up, right? And then I'll be like, Baba, I don't see you at mosque though. Yeah, because that doesn't excite them. That thing excited them, right? So they came because there was an opportunity for them to do good. And so what you find is that they are inclined towards act of goodness. I think we can all appreciate that. And I think that also when the truth is presented to our youth, and again, there's a lot of you here today, and I'm happy about that. That when the truth is presented, I would say generally they will accept that truth. They will accept it. Now the acceptance of that truth is really dependent on multiple factors, right? So number one, I think that it depends on their surrounding. So for example, it depends on how they were brought up. Were they brought up with the establishment of a truth or not? About the preaching of truth? Because I think one of the main things we have to understand is that there is a truth. Truth is not relative, right? And I think sometimes it's very difficult for us to understand when we're constantly bombarded with different agendas, I would call it. Truth becomes very relative at that point. So is this person telling the truth or is this person? And both of them have a platform. How do I know who is the truth? Well, in Islam, truth is a very clear demarcation. It's a very clear line. There is no, like I've always said, the idea that there exists a gray area in Islam is not true. You know what I mean? I think if we say that this is a gray area, it would be much closer to falsehood than it would be to truth. Because if you are on truth, it's not a gray area at all. It's very clear, the demarcation. And so there has to be this upbringing that there is a truth, that my surroundings and my environment have indicated to me what that truth is, because truth needs guidance. If truth, and I think this is true in most instances, but more so ever than today, where if we are left to our own devices, and I mean that figuratively and literally, right? So if we just give our kids a device and say, go find the truth, they will remain confused. just the way I would remain confused, because it's hard to find the truth, right? Even if I only subscribe, for example, to like Islamic channels, let's say, right? And even on my Instagram, I've only liked Islamic pages. I don't even know what it's called on Instagram, you know? I will find 5 scholars saying 5 different things. And so how do I know what's the truth, right? And so truth by itself is not easy to find. Because if it was, then there would be no need for 124,000 prophets. You understand? Right? Like, it's obvious. That's why God sent prophets, because otherwise truth is by itself is very hard to decipher. And so from one hand, when the truth is presented to our youth and that upbringing is there, I find that they are inclined to accept it. Now, acting on it is difficult. So acting on it is something else. So yes, they may accept the truth, but to then expect them to act on it when you are engulfed with so many distractions, I think that's where the challenge is. So again, presenting is one thing, accepting is, I think, also possible, but then acting on it, that's the third level, right? And that's where youth or no youth, everyone struggles on the acting part, right? Acting on it. So again, understand what the age group of youth is, understand the importance of it. Now, what is the responsibility of the youth? I want to just touch upon 3 points. For us, we gave 5 points. Here, I want to touch upon 3 points. And I think they're very doable points. Number 1, you have to take life seriously. You know what I mean? It's that simple. Take life seriously. Now, you can take life seriously on 2 fronts. If we're just looking at it from the dunyawi front, from the worldly front, man, take life seriously, right? Because every action that we do has an absolute effect, and not even a possible effect. Understand what I'm saying? Every action and every step that we take has an absolute effect on our characteristics and our willpower and on our outlook in life. Every step you take. We have in the past described the soul as if it is a carbon copy paper. You remember a carbon copy paper? I don't know how many of you remember. I don't know if our kids remember, but like, you know, like that blue paper underneath paper and you write on it and it gets imprinted. I don't know if they still have that today, but they have. I went to a dry cleaner, they had it today, you know. They gave me a receipt from that kind of paper. Our soul is like that. And what that means is that everything I see, everything I touch, everything I smell, everything I even spend time thinking about gets imprinted into my soul. And it's never left. It never leaves, right? And so I can fall back on it if I want. I can shove it down other pieces of paper, but it remains and it has an effect on us. And so take life seriously. So you may do something that maybe brought you excitement. You may do something that maybe brought you pleasure. You may do something that maybe gave you more popularity and friends. But if that action is not a positive action, it's just going to lead you to be a mean person, a bad person. You know what I mean? So sometimes, you know, like I may make fun of somebody, and that action led to people laughing with me. And so it felt good. People laughed with me. And so I become a person who now calls out the faults of people, right? Expecting that type of laughter. And I may get a laughter because I may just hang out myself or hang out with those type of people. But those type of things, not only is there a consequence for it, but it's developing a characteristic. Yeah? That's the person I'm becoming. And eventually I become just a mean person. You know what I mean? And so take life seriously from that perspective. From another perspective of taking life seriously, and this is especially true in the day of social media that we live in, our choices in our youth, especially those things we hit post on, will come back to bite us. I guarantee it. Yeah, I can't even say that any more clearly. I guarantee it. You post something it will come back on you, especially if you regret it later, right? We've seen this with like politicians, Trudeau and his black faces, we see 30 years later come back. Why? Because there was a picture taken, posted, right? Somewhere, someone found it. Well, today we have that. You know, there was a time when you sinned and you sinned alone and it was just between you and God. Today that sin is publicized, right? And it will come back to bite you. I've told you this many times that when people call me to ask about a rishta, you know, for marriage, they say that, you know, Sheikh, this guy goes to your mosque, tell me about him. Or this girl goes to your mosque, and I'll be like, honestly, like I meet that person once a week. What do I know about that person? You know, as I go look at their social media, right? It will tell you exactly who they are, right? Do they like music? You'll see it on their social media. What kind of movies they like, who they hang out with, all of these things. Not only in your professional life, not only in your religious life, will always come back. And so, post very carefully. Very carefully. Like things very carefully. You know what I mean? Like sometimes even just to like something innocently, we think, you know, he's my friend, I like it. Well, everybody else has just seen what you liked. And you may not have intended to like it, but they have developed an opinion of you based on that like. All of these things are important. So in Islam, you know, take this world seriously. But from the other perspective, you look at the hereafter. And what we have to understand, and you have to understand, my youth, you know, that there are no empty actions in Islam. No empty actions. And what that means is that I will be held responsible for everything that I do. Everything that I do. Right? And that realization doesn't kick in until much later in life, unfortunately. And now much later in life, and that later could be in my 20s, it could be in my 30s, it could be in my 40s, but now I look back and be like, man, I got 5 years of qadha salah to pray. Right? Like, whoa, you know how much 5 years is? Right? Like that's a lot of qadha salah. Or I have 3 years of fasting that I have to pay back. Like, oh, that's a lot of fasting. Right? And the kafara on top of that. Right? It's not worth it. Absolutely not worth it. Or I hurt somebody. I get emails every so often, you know. They say, Sheikh, I did something to somebody when I was in high school. I regret it. I can't find them. What do I do now? They live with that regret. You know what I mean? Like in Islam, like hukukun nas is serious business, right? And so the first thing that I want to tell, that I wish, and I know my parents tried, you know. Like take life seriously. You know what I mean? That the period of youth does not give you an excuse to play around. It does not, right? Take life seriously. That's number one. Number two, listen and take advice from those who are more experienced than you. Remember we said in the other side that this job of the adults and the parents to give advice. Well, now it's your job to take that advice. You know what I mean? Take it. Even though you may think that we don't understand, like believe it or not, like everyone here today, you know, I see people with white hair sitting on the chairs. They all used to be youth at one time. You know what I mean? They all did. And the temptations you have, they had. The mistakes you make, they made. We've all been there. We're just doing it differently now. The scale is different, you know. Accept the advice. Just accept it and reflect on it. It goes a long way. It really goes a long way. Now, the folly of every single human being is what? To believe that no one understands me of what I'm going through. That's the belief, yeah? That my problems are different than their problems. And we've always had this notion, we know better, they don't understand, I have to pave my own way. This is again one of the biggest mistakes we make, you know. And that is that every single person tries to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? This happens in jamaats, this happens in businesses, this happens in governments, where when the new term comes, they dismantle everything, start over. So by the time their term ends, nothing's happened because they're still building the wheel. You know what I mean? And this is the same mistake we make as adults, or as youth, or as adults. I'm going to do it my way. And then all you're left is with the same regrets that we've had because we didn't listen to our parents, you didn't listen to us. We're at the same cycle, the wicked and the vicious cycle. Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, Salli ala Muhammadin wa Ali Muhammad. He in letter number 31 of Nahjul Balagha, he says, وَإِنَّمَا قَلْبُ الْحَدَثِ كَالْأَرْضِ الْخَالِيَةِ مَا أُلْقِيَ فِيهَا مِنْ شَيْءٍ قَبِلَتْهُ. This is a very famous hadith, where he says, indeed the heart of a young person is like uncultivated land. It accepts whatever you throw in it. And that's what we've heard all the time, right? But then he continues in this, because here in this letter he's giving advice to his son, right? So he says that the heart of a young person is like uncultivated land, and it accepts whatever is thrown in it. So I, the Imam says, hasten to mold you properly before your heart hardens and your mind becomes occupied, so that you might accept through your intelligence the results and experiences of others and what they have gone through. Subhanallah, right? The Imam is telling his son that, Baba, you don't have to make these same mistakes. I'm telling you what I've done. I'm telling you the mistakes I've made. Don't do them, right? And so this is that same understanding, right? That, man, you have to take the advice of the people. And you know what? If you don't have someone who can give you advice, find someone who will give you advice. Not Google, you know what I mean? Not your friends, but find a sponsor, find an adult who can sit there and give you, this idea of, what's the word I'm looking for? Where mentorship. Mentorship is so important, right? But again, to be mentored by the right type of people. So the second thing, the first one is take life seriously. Number two, accept the advice that comes to you. And the third point is be proud of your religion, right? So these are very small things, but so powerful that I wish, again, I had that. I had that when I was young. I think my life would have been different. Can you imagine if there's a better version of me? Subhanallah, you know what I mean? But life would have been different. There would have been less mistakes, you know what I mean? Be proud of your religion. So being proud of our religion is a two-step process. Number one, it requires learning about your religion. Okay? This is a responsibility of every single person. The primary responsibility to teach and guide falls on our parents. Correct? Yes, right? But after that initial dose of knowledge, the journey of learning, the journey of acceptance, and the journey of falling in love with our religion is your responsibility. Is an individual responsibility. So what that means is that my parents can teach me how to pray, and they can make me pray, but eventually the decision to pray will be my own. You know what I mean? They're not going to be around all the time. And so yes, they can teach it to me, but for me to do it by myself, that's your responsibility, individual's responsibility. If you're in the summer break right now, your mom and dad are at work, they leave you alone at home. When it's Salatul Dhuhr time, and you actually leave everything and go pray, that's because you decided to do so. Or if you wait until your dad's coming home at 4:55, you're on the musalla, right? That means you haven't yet accepted the religion the way it needs to be accepted, right? You haven't yet put into practice what you have learned. Our parents can teach us modesty, but to me, to act modestly outside is my own responsibility. And so number one, the learning process and the acting out process is yours. No one can help you do it. No one can force you to do it. It's yours. And this is where, we had that tradition that I mentioned in the beginning from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Where he's reported to have said, فَضْلُ الشَّابِ الْعَابِدِ الذي تعبد في سباه على شيخ الذي تعبد بعدما كبرت سنه كفضل المرسلين على سائر الناس. He says the superiority of a young worshipper who worships Allah in his youth over an older person who worships after he has grown old is the superiority of prophets over all mankind. Yeah? It's that much greater, that much greater. And so if that idea of learning the religion and practicing the religion is on you. No one else can make you do it. You have to want to do it. And so that requires learning. But then after the strengthening of your religion and the values that have been presented to you, and then you start practicing, be proud of its teachings. Be proud of Islam. Yeah? Be proud of that you are in the madhab of wilaya. Yeah? This is a blessing so huge, yeah, that we cannot, there's no equal to it. There's no equal to it. You know what I mean? Like something our grandfather did, something our great-grandfather did. Yeah, it's not us, you know what I mean? That was so appreciated by God that He said, I will guarantee 5 generations of believers to come after you. Subhanallah. Amazing, right? Because that's a barakah, that's a blessing that has come from something our ajdad, our grandparents have done. Be proud of your religion. And again, like I didn't have that. You know what I mean? I'll be very honest with you. I would go to school and pray, and I would hide our turba. You know, after every sajda, I would pick up my turba. Because, man, I was like the only Shia there. You know what I mean? I was afraid. You know, like, you know, every time to have iftar with my Sunni friends, I wouldn't show up. Because what am I going to tell them why I'm breaking my fast 10 minutes later? I wasn't equipped with that knowledge. You know? But today you have that knowledge. None of you can claim ignorance when it comes to these things. And once you have it, be proud of it. Man, be proud of it. You know what I mean? Like, don't ever think we're practicing differently. Please, you get that notion out of your head. Right? We're not practicing differently. The others are practicing differently. Be proud. Be very proud of your faith. Understand that our religion will never lead us to trample on the rights of others. Never. But our firmness in not supporting other people's claims of rights does not mean that we are oppressing them. You understand? There's a big difference between the two, right? Just because I don't support you doesn't mean I'm oppressing you. I'm allowed to not believe in what you're believing in, right? And this is where I think some of our youth have a very hard time separating Islamic truth from general truth, right? And they feel that, if I don't support this, like I'm oppressing. You know, this is that same, this is the guilt trap that we Muslims are put in, right? If you remember that I think it was an Edmonton teacher, just recently, right? When she scolded the Muslim students that we supported you when it came to Ramadan, why don't you support us now? That's that guilt trap that we have to be able to answer and decipher, to say, wait a minute, like you're comparing two completely different things. You know what I mean? This is not the same thing. One is a moral issue, one is a religious issue. No one's asking you to fast, right? But you're asking me to accept a lifestyle that is against my beliefs. It's a separate issue altogether, but we have to have that confidence to realize that my lack of support of that doesn't mean that I'm oppressing anybody. Islam never would oppress anyone. And part of being proud of our faith, you know, this is one of my last lectures I have with you before the month of Muharram. So remember these points, right? That part of becoming proud of our faith is that I do not fear the blame of those who blame me afterwards. You know what I mean? You may have friends who still want to do what they do, but you don't. And then they'll be like, oh, you're a Muslim now. Yeah? Like, oh, you're a practicing guy now. Oh, you're too holy now. Sometimes our own people will say that to us. Oh, to mu'min take you. Right? Like you become a mu'min. Be like, yeah man, I have. Who cares if they hate? Who cares if they hate? This is the quality of Iman, yeah? I'm not saying it. God says this in the Quran. When you look at the Quran, in Surah Al-Ma'idah, Allah addresses the believers, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. And then He says, do not go away from your religion. Otherwise Allah will bring somebody who loves Him more and they love Him. Yeah? Yuhibbunahum wa yuhibbunahu. But then Allah says that the quality of the believers He's looking for is what? Adhillatin alal mu'minin. They humble themselves before believers. Right? So when they meet a believer, they're not going to think they're superior to them. They're going to be humble. They're going to be caring in front of believers. A'izzatin alal kafirin. But they are mighty against the disbelievers. What does that mean? That means I have my values and I'm going to stick to my values and I'm not going to compromise my values. You know what I mean? Even though you may try to force me. So it doesn't mean that I am hard on other people. No, my values, right? Yujahiduna fi sabilillah. They strive in the way of Allah because it's not easy. But then wala yakhafuna lawmata laim. They don't fear the blame of blamers. This is the quality God is looking for in us. You don't understand my lifestyle. I don't need you to practice it. Yeah, I don't need you to accept it. Just know that this is who I am. Right? So if I pray like this and you can't stand it, maybe we can't exist together then. That's okay. This is a'izzatun alal kafirin. Yeah? Doesn't mean that, okay, you don't like it, I won't do it in front of you. No, if it's haqq, it's haqq. You understand? Yeah? Be proud of your religion. Be proud. Practice it. Right? Don't worry about it. It's amazing like now that like we've become global. Like if you go to Turkey, for example, and you go, Turkey's a hub where you have to stop to get to that part of the world. If you ever go in the Musalla in the Turkish airport, just check out how many turbas there are there. Yeah, it's mind-boggling. They actually have it on their shelves, There used to be a time where you would be afraid because you'd see people with long beards and you'd be like, oh, I don't know what they're going to say, right? But now you're like, no, I'm going to pray like this, right? And no one's going to say anything to me and no one will say anything to you. Be proud. Right? It's becoming more globally understandable and acceptable. These 3 points for our youngsters, yeah? Take it. Believe it. It's coming from experience, yeah? Take life seriously, number 1. Yeah? Take life seriously. Number 2, listen to the advice of people. And if you don't have anyone, seek the advice of people. And learn and be proud of your religion. 3 simple points to ensure that the period of youth is maximized. And if you do so, it will insha'Allah benefit you in dunya and akhirah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. La Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Tonight we remember 2 young children who lived by this. They realized that the life that they had was precious, and so they didn't play around with it. They listened to the guidance that their father and their family gave them. And they were proud of being from Ali Muhammad. And these are the children of Muslim. Some narrations tell us that when Muslim was arrested or about to be arrested, he dispatched his children to go and inform Imam al-Hussein of what happened. There are many narrations. But these children being young, they were taken into prison. And so after Karbala and after Ashura, they remained in the prison for an entire year until we come back to Dhul Hijjah, a date such as this. And after being in prison for so long, they decided to finally reveal to the guards who they were. So they saw that there was one man who used to come, who used to seem to be sympathetic. And so one day they decided to strike up a conversation with them, and they said to him, Ya Sheikh, Hal ta'arifu Muhammad ibn Abdullah? He said, do you know Muhammad bin Abdullah? He said, of course, that is Rasulullah. Who doesn't know Rasulullah? He says, Ya Sheikh, Hal ta'arifu Ali ibn Abi Talib? He says, do you remember Ali? Do you know who Ali is? And the man would reply that at the time of Ali in Kufa, there was justice, that till today that justice has not been seen again. And then they said, Ya Sheikh, فَنَحْنُ مِنْ إِتْرَةِ نَبِيِّكَ Muhammad. We are from that family of Muhammad. وَنَحْنُ مِنْ وُلْدِ Muslim bin Aqil. And we are the children of Muslim. It is said that this guard found a way to release these two boys. But again, these two young boys, the children of Muslim, found themselves in a city that they were not familiar with. As they walked through the streets, they ended up by the river Furat. And that is where they met a lady who again was sympathetic to the Ahlul Bayt. She took them into her house, but said to them that be very careful and silent, for my husband Harith works for Ibn Ziyad. The children stayed in an area of the house alone in privacy. They prayed, they fell asleep. And then all of a sudden we are told both these children awake. Both these children begin to cry. Muhammad looks at Ibrahim and Ibrahim looks at Muhammad, and they both say to one another, I just saw my father in my dream, and he is telling us that soon we will be meeting him. The children embrace each other and cry and they lament, but it is these tears that were heard by this mal'oon Harith, who imprisons the children in his own house, and then in the morning he takes them by the river Furat. He orders his slave to execute them, but the slave looks at these children and says, I cannot do this. And then he orders his son to execute them, but he as well refuses. And then this mal'oon unsheathes his sword as the boys call out to Allah, Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. We say to these young two children, our salam to you. You know, sometimes, my brothers and sisters, the difficulty that one endures, if they endure it by themselves, it is hard enough. But when someone who loves you watches you endure to that, it adds a whole nother level of difficulty. And this is where I remember Hussein in Karbala, that yes, his family one by one became shaheed, but Hussein watched each one become shaheed. And the heartache that accompanied that was too much to bear. And I think of another young child at this time, Qasim, that when Qasim went to fight, this was very difficult for Imam al-Hussein. But when Qasim fell from his horse, you know, history tells us that there were very few people who called Hussein alayhi salam to come to him for aid. When Ali al-Akbar fell, he sent salams. When Abbas fell, he sent salams. But it is said that when Qasim fell, he called out to his uncle, Ya Amma, Ya Amma. Why did Qasim call out to his uncle in this way? Because Qasim was being trampled by horses as he fell. And Hussein would come to him to see his body completely trampled by horses. فَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ وَالْعَاقِبَةُ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to hasten the return of our Imam. For those going through difficulty, that He end their difficulty. For those that have asked us to pray for them, Ya Allah, accept their hajat. Mata mein Hussein. Ya Hussein.